Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, Christian.
Hi, Michelle. How are you doing?
Fine. How are you?
Good,
Today's
good.
episode is brought to you by Opus to MBE LLC, the Grouchy Architect, and here he is.
That's me. Yeah. Uh, well, I am a licensed architect in New York, but I am now semi-retired, so I don't do the things that most architects do anymore. So what I've been doing since the pandemic, when I lost my last job, is helping other architects by reviewing their drawings with my magic red pen and marking all the things that I find questionable or puzzling or whatever, and then let the architects decide whether what I'm questioning makes any sense or not. And I also have been writing their technical specs. So I no longer draw or design anything, but I get to work in a variety of project types that is amazing and wonderful because if I were working on my own, I would probably have to focus on just residential or just something else. And now I get to do single family homes, multifamilies, pharmacies, restaurants, hotels, medical facilities, a little bit of everything. And I have a lot of fun.
That's great. Christian Nielsen-Palacios is a licensed architect with over 40 years of experience, primarily focused on quality assurance, QA, quality control, QC, and technical specification writing for architectural projects. He earned his architecture degree from Universidad Simón Bolívar, I don't know, in Venezuela. Is that close? Was I close?
Close, close enough.
Okay. And later completed a master's in the history of architecture at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. After relocating to the US in 1984, Christian worked in various architectural firms, contributing to numerous public school projects. In 1991, he became a registered architect in New York State. Currently semi-retired, he operates Opus 2 MBE LLC, offering consulting services that include peer reviews of construction documents, technical specification writing, mentorship for architects, especially those in small firms, and translation and proofreading services in English and Spanish. Christian is active online under the moniker The Grouchy Architect. Google him where he shares insights on architectural practice, quality control, and professional development. He also maintains a presence on LinkedIn where he engages with the architectural community and on Facebook, sharing both professional and personal content.
Sounds about right.
So that's if people don't know, that is Albert Einstein's workspace behind Christian. Not that my own workspace doesn't look similar to that in
Yeah.
reality, right?
Yeah, I have a messy office that I am embarrassed about. So I thought I would have as a background for my Zoom meetings Einstein's messy office, which has more pedigree. So, but I'm not quite as smart as he is, but don't tell anybody.
And he won't be able to tell you because he's not alive anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what are your first recollections of experiencing architecture?
I'm going to guess, and since I know that you and I have in common a little bit about Denmark, but when I was 9 years old, my father, who was Danish, took the family to live in Denmark. I can go more into that later if there's time.
Okay.
But I thought the Danish houses were really cool, much, much smaller than what I was used to in Caracas, in Venezuela, and much more modern for the most part, at least where we
Mhm.
were living, and the small summer houses that a lot of Danish people have in addition to their main residence.
Mhm.
And I even remember the smell of the wood and all that kind of stuff. And I like that. But then in high school, I had a class in technical drawing, and I really enjoyed doing those kinds of drawings. They were not particularly architectural, they were probably more mechanical, but I loved playing with the geometry and understanding how the different geometrical shapes can be combined, and how you can uh, have the curves that are in a perfect tangent to whatever straight line you were working with, and
Mhm.
I had a lot of fun. And then the uh, counseling department that we had in high school to help us decide what we wanted to study. I got somewhat high uh, scores in that area, but I was debating whether to be an architect or a doctor. I wanted to be a pediatrician
Uh-huh.
until somebody pointed out that not all of my patients would survive. And
Yes.
I am a wimp when it comes to death. I'm not afraid of death myself, but having a little kid under my care die was not something I could have dealt with. So architecture it was.
Mhm. I didn't want to be a veterinarian because of the same reason.
Yeah,
So,
interesting. Yeah, I guess architecture was, well, I don't know if I would call it my second choice, but I wouldn't change anything. I loved architecture school, and for the most part, being an architect, being an employee, a little less. But right now, at almost 69, I'm having the time of my life working with colleagues like the people listening to this podcast.
mhm. Yeah. And Christian and I know each other from the Entre Architect group. Again, like many of my guests, through the context and clarity that happened during COVID. I think there was a daily, kind of a daily session, and I think it was really a great thing to have that kind of kept us probably a little bit saner during COVID.
Yeah,
And then your sister is also an architect, correct?
yeah, correct. But she's in Florida. I'm in Ithaca, New York, where
Yes.
Cornell University is, and she's in the on the east coast of Florida, somewhere near Jupiter.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, she went to the same school that I went to, but a few years later.
Mhm.
And yeah,
And she's also an artist.
yeah, which I am not. She's a very talented artist and painter, and she can basically draw and paint anything. I cannot. I can draw anything with a computer, but I also stopped at AutoCAD.
Mhm.
I eventually, after several decades of working, I rose through the ranks from starting as a draftsperson to becoming like an associate principal for one of the firms that I worked at, but that meant that I was doing more and more management and less design and drafting.
Mhm.
So I missed the boat on Revit, for example. So I became the old guy who cannot draw, but that's fine. I'm doing other things and enjoying it very much.
Mhm.
Uh,
Um, and then, so how long were you in Denmark for?
a little less than a year. It was like an academic year, more or less.
Okay.
Well, my father was having some health issues with his kidneys and stuff, and he thought he was
Mhm.
going to die, and he wanted to die in Denmark, where he was.
Okay.
So he took the whole family there, and eventually the doctor told him that he was not going to die, and that because we were all so homesick for Venezuela, he said,
Uh-huh.
"Take your family back to Venezuela. You're not going to die from this." And he lived many more years.
Did you learn Danish while you were there?
I had friends, so I was repeating fourth grade when I was there,
Uh-huh.
so I know that I had friends, and I communicated with people. So, but I am not. I suspect you may be better at speaking Danish than I am. I can still read and understand some. I love it when my cousins will post hopefully a short joke or something in Facebook and I get it. When I read a little thing in Danish and I understand it, I feel so proud of myself. But to have a conversation would be difficult, and people would have to be talking to me and to me only. When I
Yeah.
visited there, if we're sitting at the table having dinner together or something and everybody's talking at the same time, it might as well be Chinese. And
Well, my Danish sister that moved, it's probably been like 20 years now. She moved to Ireland and she said that when she comes back and she speaks to her family in Danish, they say, "Oh, you speak gammeldansk. You don't have like it's like not the kind of the lingo because right? I mean, because you do translations and everything that like speech has become like more what word am I looking for?
informal, maybe.
Yes, yeah, and for slang.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's more
Like I
slang,
know that
really.
there's, like in many other languages, Spanish included, there's two
Yeah.
different words for you, depending on who you are addressing. And as I understand it, the formal one has pretty much disappeared in Denmark. So other than the king, you can say do to anybody, your professor, your elder, uh,
Yes.
people, whatever. And
Yeah.
I would have a hard time with that. But
Yeah, and then where was it in Denmark?
Aarhus.
Oh, okay, you were yeah. My Danish my Danish mother and 2 of 2 of the girls, now 3 of them actually, 3 of the girls are that they had 3 girls when I lived with them, and then they had 2 more girls after I left, and then they got divorced, and then my Danish mother moved to Aarhus. She's actually in Abeltoft, and then she had 2 of the girls with her, and then one of the other girls I got, and then my other Danish sister that's from Ireland, her summer house is in is there a little bit north of Appleton on the water.
Well, if I ever go back to Denmark, I'll have to have you introduce me to them because Ebeltoft is my favorite place in Denmark.
Oh, it is. Yeah, yeah. So she lives right. Yeah, she lives. I mean, I think I might have posted photos of it or whatever. And then there's this house that was all run down. And then my Danish family is saying, "Oh, why don't you move over here?" And I said, "Well, because it takes 25 years to become a citizen in Denmark. I would have had to start like a long time ago." And I said, "And I can't afford a place to live here." And then there was this broken down house in this in Appleton, and they said, "Oh, Michelle, you could probably afford that place." And I said, "I don't even know if I can afford that place or not." But
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I
yeah. So the ship museum and everything, they have like one of the like the tall ship museums there.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really. We were there at Yule, so it was nice. It was nice. Um, so what are 3 classic buildings that you like and why?
Well, I suspected you were going to ask that, so I did check a few things this morning. But one that I often mention is Eero Saarinen's little chapel at MIT.
Okay.
I love the interior of that little chapel, the way the light comes in and the way the water makes it reflect in a shimmering way on the walls and the brick textures and all that kind of stuff. And it's a very, very small building. And
Yes,
in
that's what I've
general,
heard. I've not been there, but yeah.
I tend to like smaller things where maybe because they're smaller, they can devote more time to the details and the craftsmanship of the building. Um, Another one that is maybe the opposite that I like is IMP's National Gallery in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
And also the interior more than the exterior, although the exterior is very dramatic and what most people focus on. But I think when you go in and you see all the bridges and the escalator and the stairs and all that kind of stuff, it's so dynamic. It seems to be moving in every direction when you're there, and you can barely focus on the artwork in there.
Uh-huh.
So, and the last one that I wanted to mention was a very small Gothic church in Nuremberg, Germany, that I visited in 1977, before most listeners were born here. But I was there kind of backpacking through Germany for 13 weeks with a friend, and it was a very hot summer day. And we went in there. It was the very first time that he and I, he's also an architect, had seen a Gothic building. And
Uh-huh.
when we entered, the change in everything was so striking. You know, all of a sudden, it wasn't hot anymore, because when you have a 5 foot thick or more stone walls,
Yeah.
it was cold inside, even though
Hmm.
you were sweating outside.
Yeah.
And then you had the light filtering through the stained glass on the thing, and you had the sound of a bunch of nuns that were in a far corner there praying the rosary or something like that. And it affected all my senses. And I told my friend, you know, if they start burning incense, I'm gonna get a heart attack here. You're gonna have to call call the hospital or something like that. And the memory of that many years later, well, not that many, 4 years later, made me want to have my thesis focus on what other senses, in addition to sight, uh, do in architecture. One of
Uh-huh.
my professors made some comment that I don't remember, but it made me think, you know, like in the Guggenheim Museum in New York City, when the janitors turn the lights off at midnight, is it still architecture? So I wanted to think about those things. And so I designed a building for the blind,
Uh-huh.
just to see what touch and smell and uh, even taste maybe, and sound did for architecture. So
Yes.
it was
Yeah.
an interesting experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of my friends used that as one of the as like a project for her class at a community college that's here that I was that I was I went to do crits for them, for a few times for that project. And it's interesting. It's interesting what people kind of, pick up on, right? Like just that as far as the depth, like when you cover your eyes, is it better to have a wall right next to you, or is it better to have the wall, right? Because typically, right, a blind person will say that they want it further away because they would walk into it if they even though they can sense it, that they would rather have it a little bit further away from them and be able to, touch it with their or know it that way. I mean, was that your experience, or what did you find
Well, in those days, there was
from that
no Google.
thesis?
So I remember that I spent the summer before my thesis in Boston, actually, staying with some friends who were going to MIT or Harvard, I forget. And so I spent like 2 weeks going to the MIT library every day and going through their little card catalogs and picking out all those little 3x5 cards and finding books, and then getting photocopies made of things that I found interesting,
Uh-huh.
that had to do with that, the polysensory perception of space,
Mm-hmm.
and architecture for the blind, and
Mm-hmm.
visited, was it Stanley Tigerman's library in Chicago, that I don't think exists anymore. I think it was demolished, but it was
Mm-hmm.
for the blind. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of fun reading about those things and imagining what other things we could be doing in architecture that are not just for the people who can see them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I learned a lot. I still like my floor plans. I left the elevations to the very end, so they are lousy, and I'm not proud of them, or hope I no one ever sees them again. But my thesis defense, the harshest critic was a professor who told me that I had invented a lot of non-existing problems just to show that I could solve them. And in hindsight, he was right. But I also think that that is the purpose of a thesis when you're doing research. You know, yeah, make up some problems and find out solutions for them because that's how you learn.
Uh-huh.
And I had a good time, and I passed, and then I graduated, and I love teasing you Americans with this, but I graduated on a Saturday, and on Monday I had my own firm with 5 other people because things in Venezuela and in many other countries are very different than from here. And graduating from whatever academic program you are in is enough for you to practice whatever profession you are, whether you're an architect, an engineer, a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer. That's it. You don't have to go through the ARE and 3 years of experience with somebody else and take all the
Uh-huh.
exams and all that stuff. But then I came here 3 years later because my partners, my 5 partners were and still are brilliant,
Uh-huh.
brilliant architects and scholars. And they all had masters from Harvard, Yale, and MIT. And I was the dumbest one. I was also the youngest one, but I decided, okay, I have to match these guys. And so I came to get a master's at Cornell
Uh-huh.
and supposedly for 2 years. And 41 years later, here I am, still here. But
And you wrote a book, right? Because you got a
yeah,
master's in architectural history and then you wrote a book.
yeah, I originally was supposed to get an M.Arch from Cornell,
Uh-huh.
but during my first semester, I realized that I was having a lot more fun with my minor in history than with my major in design.
Uh-huh.
And so I asked to switch, and they allowed me to do that. And so I was in the history of architecture graduate program. And one of the things that I loved was learning about the history of architecture in the US and England and so on in the 19th century and
Mhm.
the origins of the profession as we know it. So I love learning about those guys like Richardson and Hunt and
Yeah.
Sullivan,
Yeah.
whatever, and how architecture was different and the
Mhm.
apprenticeship model that started first and then the École des Beaux-Arts model and how many of them went to France to get their degree and then started the same thing here. And so I focused on that for the time that I was there.
Mhm.
And I also remember the school that I went to in Venezuela was a very new architecture school. I am a member of the 5th class to graduate from there. So I think it started in like 69 or something, and I graduated in 81. It was a 6-year professional degree, so that's also why we are allowed to practice the day after we graduate. And the founding faculty was like 80 or 90% Cornell alumni. You know, the guys who got together to create the School of Architecture in that
Uh-huh.
university. I think all but one were from Cornell, of the founders, and then eventually there were more. But they kept talking about Cornell this, Cornell that, and Le Corbusier and the what do you call it, the 5 architects and Hedjuk and Graves and all
Yeah.
the guys and the clean lines and modernism and Gropius and Mies and all that kind of stuff. And then when I was here at Cornell, I realized that for most of its history, Cornell had been the prototypical French school with everybody having gone to the École des Beaux-Arts and them teaching this and they winning the Rome Prize every year with their very classical designs and so on. And that surprised me a little bit. So I said, how could it go from being a very classical French style school to being the Corbusian school that my professors talked and bragged about?
Uh-huh.
So I decided to study that kind of period because I knew that up to the 30s it was very classical, and then from the 50s on it was very modern. So I
Mhm.
decided, okay, let me see what was happening at Cornell between 1929 and 1950 or something like that. And
There are still those schools out there that are classically trained, and it's
yeah,
all about. There's one in Salt Lake City. One of the colleges in Salt Lake City is all.
yeah, yeah, I don't know about that one, and and I appreciate both things, but it was interesting to see what was happening and how the faculty had changed and how the Second World War affected things, and
Yeah.
um, so yeah, so I did write the thesis, and then I just as an experiment I just converted into a Kindle book on Amazon, and it's there. And I keep procrastinating on creating a paperback version because apparently many of us architects still prefer the hard copy that we can hold on our hands instead of reading on our iPad. But
I don't read. I try not to read that much. I try not to even read things on my laptop. Actually, it's like I and yeah and yeah.
yeah, well,
Well, we'll put that book in the show notes so people can and in the
okay,
blog so that people
yeah,
can order it. I think I've had it. I think I had it on my book list. I had it on my book list that I published at the end of the year last year. Yeah.
well, just like my thesis on designing for the blind, my thesis on writing about Cornell, I had a lot of fun, and so I published it because I wanted to give the chance to other people to read what I did.
Hmm.
It's I got my master's thanks to that. I know it, I admit it's not PhD level, but that's fine. And I think people, architects in particular, and Cornellians even more, will should enjoy reading it. But that's my very biased opinion.
I'm gonna do a podcast with the person, but there was the person it's Bill Scott that he was a Taliesin fellow, but he also had he had a degree in architecture, and then he got his master's in architectural history, and so he's in charge of the organic architecture and design division. He's in Kentucky. Then there's another guy that's in Chicago, and they're archiving all of the Taliesin fellows' work in this place in Arizona. And so I went there, I like posted some pictures on my Instagram, but he was just saying that like he thought that really, I mean, the people that know architectural history are typically people that have an undergrad in architecture and then go on to architectural history, because he kind of sees that you really can't, even though there's a ton of architectural historians are out there that don't have that don't have a background in architecture, but he really sees that like you have to understand architecture from an architect's in order to understand a lot of the architectural history, which of course there's,
Yeah,
I mean, there's different focuses, right? People will focus on different things and, depending on what their background is, if they get their master's or PhD in architectural history, so it's like people that are more interested in kind of like the social context of things will choose that, and other people will choose more of like the architectural design and things that,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. My experience at Cornell was interesting because I don't think the less than half of us were architects of us students in the grad program. So there were
Mm-hmm.
people there with bachelors in French or English or whatever, and they were studying, and they were brilliant. But
Mm-hmm.
I remember in particular one year, the summer of '87, we went on a summer course to Europe to study
Mm-hmm.
Baroque architecture. One of my professors was a specialist on Baroque and modern architecture, German
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And it was, I think, the first time that grad students had been invited because it was usually only for undergrads. But I know the undergrads treated me like a celebrity because I actually knew how to draw. I was the only one among the grad students in that trip who was also an architect, and
Uh-huh.
they were amazed that I actually could draw a floor plan, and the others couldn't do that. You know, they also at that time. I love languages, like you said. I need to get better in my Danish, but that time I was taking a lot of Italian and German classes. I love those two languages, and unfortunately,
Hmm.
I let them become very, very rusty. But in 1987, I was still pretty decent. And
Hmm.
I thought at one point that I might continue for a PhD, which I didn't. But one of the requirements was that you had to have reading proficiency in at least two foreign languages. And I took the test in German and Italian because I thought taking it in Spanish was kind of cheating. And I
Christian.
well, but I passed both.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
In 1987, I had reading proficiency in German and Italian. And in that trip to Europe, we went to Italy and
Uh-huh.
Czechoslovakia and Germany and Austria and all that. And I could communicate with people, and all these undergrads were also, oh my God, Christian can talk to anybody. And plus I had friends in Germany and in Italy that I got to see, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
said,
Yeah. Yeah.
Christian knows everybody. So there was a lot of really fun.
And I mean, I've seen that people that know Spanish, it's like it's a little Italian's a little bit easier for them.
It is
Yeah.
very much easier, and my friends tease me about it because I got like an A plus. No, not an A plus. I got an A in Italian all the time, but getting an A plus is impossible because no, Spanish makes it a lot easier, but it also makes it impossible to get it perfect because
Yes.
they would always make some stupid little mistake that we could attribute to the fact that I knew Spanish. I said
Yeah.
something the Spanish way instead of the Italian way.
Yes. 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 There were there's actually like when my kids had to take a foreign language in school, there's a class for kids that have like it that also speak Spanish. And so it would, but it's also, because I mean, Mexican Spanish is not formal Spanish. And so, and so we learn, formal Spanish here. And, so anyway, but they do, it's like they do have a better background and get better grades in which it's like very, I always like laugh when there's a person that, any of the people that are getting a 5.0, they don't get a 5.0 because they had to take foreign language here, because the foreign language classes are like so difficult that even like the Spanish language classes, they're just all like so difficult that it just, that nobody gets an A in them.
Yeah,
And so those are the people, everybody that's like not a 5.0, it's typically because it's some Spanish class that they didn't get an A in.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I somehow was able to transmit the love of languages to my kids, who both are pretty good in Spanish. One uses it every day because he's now a lawyer helping immigrants, so he speaks Spanish every day.
Hmm.
And but it's not thanks to me because I'm a very impatient teacher. So I have to give credit to the faculty at Ithaca High School for making them really good in Spanish. And then that oldest son also, his bachelor's is in Chinese. So he also speaks Chinese. And they tell me that he's very good, but I have no idea. But
Yeah, the kid's dad was not good at languages. His mother spoke Spanish, but he never really. I mean, he had some knowledge of it, but not really. And my daughter is really, she's really good. And then she spent a semester in Spain learning it also. But she's really good. But she'll say like, I'll say that she's fluent, And, and she's like, well, not really in the workplace. And I said, because she doesn't know all the Spanish words for the occupational therapy terms. And I'm like, okay, well, you can speak it. You can just look up those
Yeah.
terms if you need them, but you can still convey it to the patient, because otherwise,
Yeah.
I mean, you're still able to converse with them and tell them, what the diagnosis is and things. And then like just look at, you can look it up in a book or put it in Translate for those, for the medical terms that are not right. And a lot of the medical terms are Latin anyway. So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me make a complaint here about Google Translate, because
Oh, yes.
in my opinion, it sucks. One of
No.
my back burner projects is that I want to create a series of dictionaries, English to Spanish and Spanish to English, for architects, but organized according to CSI spec divisions. So the
That's
first one
good.
that I
Yeah.
started is on door hardware. And I have a column with all the terms in English, then the terms in Spanish, and in traditional Spanish, or maybe even Venezuelan Spanish, because that's what I know.
Yeah.
And I would love to have future editions where readers will tell me, well, in Peru we say this instead, or in Mexico we prefer this, and so
Hmm.
on. But I have a column for Google Translate, and the translation that Google Translate gives me for spring hinge only makes sense if there's also a summer hinge, a winter hinge, and an autumn hinge. So you can see how bad Google Translate is. So
Yeah.
tell your
Yeah.
daughter to not rely on Google Translate, because you never know what it's going to come up with.
Well, she should probably be coming up with, I mean, I'm sure it's out there somewhere, right? It's
Yeah,
got to be
yeah.
out there
I'm sure
somewhere.
there's glossaries and stuff, and I can
Yeah.
send her or
Yeah.
send you to give to her some recommendations on better places to help you with
Yeah.
translating
Yeah. Yeah.
to
For the
other
medical
languages.
terms,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
but
Um,
yeah.
so what do you like about being an architect?
Again, I loved playing with shapes and geometry and light
Uh-huh.
and so on. I love when the thing that you design is built and the people who use the building like it. One of the
Mhm.
best days in my life was a day that I happened to be at a brand new middle school that I had been in charge of. And
Mhm.
I think you know that at least in bigger firms, no one can claim to be the architect for the building. So it was definitely very much a team effort. But I was the, if not the project manager, at least the job captain or something. So I did all the coordination. And I happened to be there the first day of school for that middle school for a meeting.
Uh-huh.
And to see the faces of the kids being in their new building for the first time, that was amazing. I, you know, my eyes are watering as I remember that, because it was such a cool satisfaction to see how happy and amazed they were at their new facility.
Mhm.
And you gotta love that, you know.
Yeah.
And I suppose that, I haven't done almost any residential myself, but
Mhm.
when you have a client or a family and the husband and wife and children, whatever, and they go to their new house and they love it, it must be similar to that, you know. So and now I love what I'm doing now, because I get to do a little bit of everything with people like you, even though you and I haven't worked together, but
Oh yeah.
we
Yeah.
have
No, I'm definitely, I mean, it's not like it's not like I don't need somebody like you.
yeah, but you mentioned the Antri Architect Network, and that's where I get most of my networking done, and not only in the network itself that I highly recommend to anybody listening to this, even though it costs
Mhm.
money, but
Mhm.
to me it has actually been better than AI in many ways.
Yeah.
But even the Facebook group, that's where we started with the during the pandemic that you mentioned, context and clarity in those days where we were totally isolated from our colleagues. I had lost my job in a way,
Hmm.
That's how I got to network and get to know some really wonderful people. And the impact that that networking has had on my income is amazing.
Oh, that's good.
Love it.
That's good. Yeah.
And that's why I got to know you. I believe it was in Ecclestock in 2021 in Vermont.
Yes.
For those listening, Michele makes great pizza, and and
I
then
wonder, I mean, I'd like to see like what I mean, he's supposedly doing building out there.
yeah, you mean Jay
Jay.
Jay
Yeah.
Corolli? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and he has asked for my help in one of his projects, one of the medical facilities that I mentioned a while ago. And yeah, he's one of many.
Uh-huh.
At least half, if not more, of my clients have come from that networking, those in the Facebook and the network. And probably 80% of my best friends are now from those two groups too.
And I
So
mean, and there's the architect and allies group also for people
yes,
that
yes,
that aren't architects, but are in engineering or any of the other trades or construction product salespeople or construction,
yeah.
other any of the consultants. Um, and
For
then
those listening who might not be familiar with it, the Anchor Architect group in Facebook is supposed to be limited to architects, architecture students, and liars. I always say liars because I know for a fact that there's a couple people in that group that are not architects and are not architecture students, but their contributions, in my opinion, are so valuable that I am not going to out them. But that's why Mark LePage also created the Architects and Allies to allow for non-architects to also participate. For the non-architects who are not also liars, the Architects and Allies group is a great place to be.
I mean, there are some that like go and I don't know. They I think sometimes people think that like people wouldn't notice, but it's like so obvious from some of the things that they add that we're like, what, that person couldn't possibly be an architect. Like what, but I don't know. I mean, if they feel like they can, right? Like I'm sure in the Mothers in Architecture group, I'm sure that there's men there that are like, oh, we have to be there, but but they've kind of said like, oh, if you feel like you're a mother, then you can join.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, no, the people that I'm thinking of right now are the spouses of architects who actually run the office.
oh
So
yeah.
all
Well, I
their
mean,
comments
yeah.
about the business of architecture, they know more than many of us do,
No, exactly.
even
Yeah,
though they
yeah,
themselves are not architects or students of architecture. So
yeah,
they are
yeah,
wonderful people and they provide very good feedback on questions and stuff. So I like that.
yeah, yeah. And I think also those people have kind of been there from the very beginning. They've kind of like been there the whole time or something. I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah. Um, so what would you like to say about the future of architecture?
It seems to be pretty exciting. I became the old guy who cannot draw, so I don't know how to do Revit or BIM of any kind or 3D
Mhm.
drawings or something. So I still do. Whenever I draw something, I have to do it the old-fashioned way with AutoCAD, which is also not the old-fashioned way.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
learned to draw by hand.
Yeah, me too.
Rotring pens and a mail line and triangles and protractors and all that stuff, and I love that stuff. And but now with the artificial intelligence thing, I think things are gonna get pretty interesting and exciting. I have played with it in some non-architectural ways, and I
Uh-huh.
find it both fun and scary. I downloaded an app on my phone that creates music and songs if you give it certain prompts. So I gave it some prompts, uh, and it created the Enter Architect song that I posted in my YouTube channel. Maybe you can put a link to my YouTube channel too, which only
Okay.
has
Okay.
two or three things, but the best one is this song that I posted. They're hoping that as we speak, because it's 6 p.m. in Boston right now, where the anti-architect crowd is doing karaoke right now
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay.
somewhere in Boston. So my dream or my hope is that they are going to be singing my song. That is not really my song because it was created by artificial intelligence. And I just made it into a video that could be on YouTube so that they can have the lyrics show up on their screens and they can
Is the thing tonight? Is it tonight or last night?
karaoke is supposed to be tonight at 6
Karaoke's tonight. Okay.
Eastern time. So right now.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, artificial intelligence is going to be very interesting. And again, I'm almost 69, so I'm not going to be there for when it takes over our jobs or any of those fears that people are having. But they're exciting times, and I hope I'm alive to see some of the good stuff that's going to come out of that, and not the crappy stuff that is coming out right now. But
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I've done a couple. I mean, I did the one with Greg Tate on the kind of the renderings that he like puts in, and I've kind of said, yeah, it's all about, right? It's all about kind of the input, you know, that and that's going to be like what you're going to get back. If you're not inputting the correct things, then it's not, the renderings or the other thing that the other product that you're getting back out is not as kind of unique or interesting, right, as the person that has put it in. So
yeah, but learning new things is always exciting to me, so I hope other people are also as excited about learning new things just for the fun of knowledge, and will embrace artificial intelligence and help develop it to become really useful and something that produces good quality stuff, not cheap, fast stuff. You know,
mhm.
I remember seeing drawings in that trip to Europe that I mentioned before, drawings of Balthasar Neumann, the Baroque architect, and his drawings were amazing, and they were drawn at a time where there was no electricity, and there were no main lines. Maybe there were drafting tables, I don't know, but
Yeah, I think
yeah,
there were
but he
drafting
had
tables. Yeah.
fantastic drawings, and
So who was it? Who did you say?
Balthasar Neumann,
Oh, okay.
or Newman is how probably most Americans will say it, but
You like Neumann.
yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, maybe before this ends, and I have time, so
Uh-huh.
we keep talking, but one of the things that I have in my back burner now that I'm interested in is the history of spec writing in the US, because I doubt, I remember when I was studying, again, 19th century architecture, that Henry Hobson Richardson
Hmm.
did a lot of buildings with the same builders, the brothers such and such, I forget their name,
Hmm.
but they wrote to him asking, what do you want us to do here and stuff? And he said, well, do the same thing you did in Trinity Church last year. So I suspect Richardson never wrote a spec. I have recently, like in the last 5 weeks, Googled specs for Frank Lloyd Wright, and I have found a few. I went to Taliesin, when was it? In March.
Uh,
And I
yes.
saw in one of the drawings that is exhibited there on the
Yeah.
corner, there were some concrete specs right on the drawing. And that made
Okay,
me want
so
to,
I can, yeah, I can get you because the project manuals, because a lot of that stuff, the foundation sold things to the Museum of Modern Art. What the Museum of Modern Art didn't want, they didn't want either, and they didn't have the room for it. So they actually have the project manuals at this organic architecture and design facility. And so they've got like a whole bunch of them, and then and then they also have an eBay site. So if you ever wanted to purchase any of the stuff, because like for one of the ASU buildings, it's like they had the project manuals and everything of the specs for all of the different contractors. There were 50 people that they put it out to. And so when they got it back, when they got it from ASU, they had 50 manuals. So they're not going to keep all 50 of those. So they had a bunch of those. So you can actually purchase some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I like
Send me
saw
the
them
link.
and they're all numbered. Yeah.
And that's what I would like to ask the listeners. If they know of any other resources, or if anybody in the Society of Architectural Historians has already written a book or articles on spec writing. And it's not just Frank Lloyd Wright. I thought he would be the easier one. And again, it was triggered by visiting Taliesin last March. But
Uh-huh.
I would love to see if Richardson and Hunt and Sullivan and Can and so on, what did they do for specs?
Well, I mean, at the time, you were working with builders that knew how to they're kind of like the master builder, right? They knew how to do all of those things. I mean, that's what I see. And I feel like we're kind of um the people that are our age are kind of the ones, they're kind of the last ones that kind of really learned a lot of those techniques for things. I mean, I know the contractor that I use, he knows how to do a bunch of things. And so I'll work with him on things. So some people will say, oh, why don't you have a drawing for that? And I said, well, a lot of the projects that I do, they're existing, and there's existing conditions, and then we're adding on, and some people want that to look at. I said, so I don't do a detail for that. I just say, like, match the existing detail, because you have a better chance of somebody to do what is actually there to match. If they can see it, then for them to look at, it in a book or anything. But I know. And then I just think, I mean, you look at some of their drawings. I mean, we have the drawings for or we had the drawings. I don't know where I was. I was like telling Bill Scott, like, yeah, we used to have a set of Walter Burley Griffin and Marion Mahoney's drawing blueprints, because because my late ex-husband's grandparents lived in the Schneider house in Mason City, Iowa, that's on the Glen there. And so we had the blueprints for that. I mean, I don't really know where they are right now, but that set of drawings was only, it's like, I don't believe that there were any specs in it. I mean, I think that it was them. Yeah, it was them going to the site a lot to do it. And then a lot of that stuff wasn't documented. I mean, some of it was documented, but other times it wasn't. It was just, and so even like some of the things, like they'll say, oh, and Frank Lloyd Wright was all about even the things that he wasn't on the the construction. If he couldn't go to the site, there were a lot of things, like when he went to Europe, with when he took off to Europe for a couple of years. I mean, a lot of the people that were doing the work, they weren't, either they were documenting things or they were coming up with the stuff. And some of that stuff they just did because he wanted everybody to think that he did everything. so a lot of that stuff wasn't documented. Other stuff was documented. And I mean, they have a ton of like books and archival things, and just and then one of the people, they had they'll donate all of their the fellows will donate all, every single book or whatever that they had, they'll donate it to the thing, but then they have to go through and kind of figure out, like, what is worth what's worth keeping, what isn't worth keeping, and sometimes they're books, and these books, which is what this Bill Scott was saying, these books are the books that that they used to use for different methodologies, right? And so, but there'll be this book, and you'll like think and say, oh, I don't know what that book is, and he's like, oh, that book is like they used to use like like these things from this book, but if you didn't know that, you wouldn't, you wouldn't know where that information was coming. So you should really, the next time that you're there, or, I mean, the guy's in Kentucky, and I don't know, but I mean, he, you can talk to him on the phone, or, I can send you his email.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to do again a little bit of architectural history in that field.
Hmm.
Because I remember part of the fun that I had doing my research for my thesis was that at Cornell, they had saved all the files and the file, well, not the cabinets, but there were boxes and boxes and
Yeah.
boxes of letters and memos and
Yes.
stuff in there.
Yes.
And it was
Yeah.
fascinating to see, like in Ithaca, back then there was a train. We don't have that anymore. I mean, there are train tracks and the trains bringing coal or something go by, but not
Hmm.
passenger trains. But the faculty would go to New York City on the train, and they would send letters in the mail and say this guy would write a letter on a Tuesday saying let's meet at such and such restaurant in New York City unless I hear back from you before Thursday. So
Yes.
they knew that a letter was going to arrive the next day, and there was enough time to send a letter back, before email and Google and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that was to me fascinating. And I
Hmm.
hope that the people who own all these documents at least digitize them, take pictures of them or something.
Well, see, because Bill Scott is also an architectural historian, I mean, that's why, one of the guys there had told me the last time I went to, he's like, oh, do you want to go through these drawings? And I said, the last thing you want to do is have me try to go through somebody else's drawings. I can't even go through my own drawings. It would be, I mean, I wouldn't throw anything away. I said, you need somebody that like can make can make those decisions. And so that was kind of Bill. And he said that he even had like two volunteers there, and then they were going through things, and then he was like bringing up stuff, and the two volunteers were like, oh my goodness, like we can't do this job because we don't know any of this, though you have the architectural historian background too. So I think it would be very good. I mean, I'll like definitely connect you guys, because that's definitely, because they need somebody to help
Thanks.
do that, document things, go through all of that. And yeah. uh,
That would be, for me, it would be a lot of fun.
okay.
Or
Okay.
other people would hate it, but you know,
No, and I love old book. I got this old book. It was oh my gosh. I'll actually just hurry up and run over here. So so the one that I picked up, and it was just on the and it was on the top, but it's this book, and it's called Camping. And it was by one of the fellows. I forget which fellow. It was the one that they were going through. I mean, my son Griffin went through a bunch of books. We got like 3 boxes of books here. But just all of these I mean, we have like several other, we actually have a um John Ruskin. We have a couple John Ruskin books, but I mean, just even like, just like, I mean, this I'll put it in the show notes too. But I mean, just like this whole thing, like these birds, right? We've got birds on the bird motif on the top. And so this was another thing, right? Because they would use these different motifs. And so they have all these books that have like different motifs on them, or they have these they call them abstractions with Frank Lloyd Wright. So they've got all these abstractions from all the different fellows, and then these are trees, and then these are fish down here on the bottom, and then and of course all the book plates, and then the little diagrams for this one's about camping. So they have different they have a bedroll. I actually have another. I like to camp. People don't know that about me, but I like to camp. But they have these little bedrolls, and I have this other camping book. And then just all of these like little they have oh yeah, these are all of these little tent structures that they have in here. Yeah, just little tent structures. I mean, just like they're just beautiful. And then these little diagrams with right, they've got all of the dimensions of what you're supposed to make these tents out of, right? All the little, so I mean, I have no idea like what they would, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that you're supposed to be reading about for camping, but I mean, those are like some of the things that are in, they're just books, and and he's like, oh, I don't care, like just take them, because we don't. And then they give the rest of them to the local library, because if they want to, the friends of the library, if they want to like sell some of them, then they can, and then of course they keep the their copies of the Frank Lloyd Wright books or whatever they have, because they all had to have the same, like all of us, right? We all have to have, a certain textbook. And so, everybody that was a fellow had that same textbook. So they don't really need all of those textbooks as long as they have them. So, yeah. All right. Well, anything else?
Nothing I can think of right now.
Are they going to do the Zoom karaoke?
I
Are they
don't
going to
know.
Zoom it or
No
Facebook
idea.
Live or anything? No.
No idea. When we hang up here, I'll check.
Okay. All right.
I'm
Well, thank
happy
you.
with it not being live. I just hope that somebody will record it and send me a video of some of our friends singing the Anti-Architect song, because
Okay.
it was fun
Okay.
creating it too.
Okay. I want to hear it, and we'll put the link in this. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the tape and then I'll say goodbye. But thank you so much for sponsoring the other. Thank you so much for sponsoring Rachel Green Rasmussen's from Architecton for Mother's Day, and thank you for supporting Nicole Cannon's also, and then thank you for supporting your own Father's Day podcast. Oh, what do you like about being a father in architecture?
I am truly very proud of my two sons. They are smart, good people with good values. Like the younger one is working on solar energy developments, so
Okay.
sustainability from that point of view. And again, the older one is helping people not get deported. And it's a tough job these days with all the crap that's going on. So he
Yes.
has, unfortunately, very few successes and a lot of stress. But
Oh, really?
I'm so glad that he's doing that and that he thinks that that is what he wants to devote his life to.
And he was living in LA
Not
and
anymore.
was living in a Patrick Ty building.
He
Right.
was, but now they're both in Brooklyn, half an hour away from each other. So that's also very nice, being on the same time zone as us, and the fact that the two of them get together once or twice a week. They hang out, they like each other, and I hope they will continue to like each other. And,
Oh, yeah. If they like each other at this age, I'm sure they'll like each other later on. Yes. Well, thank you so much and happy Father's Day, Christian.
Thank you. Have a good Father's Day, all the father listeners.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.